global Ziaul, realizing just transitions. Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP30 in Billy.
Yes, welcome to all of you. I'm glad that we meet here in the midst of this very dynamic COP in a very dynamic country, and I hope with a very dynamic outcome of the conference. Who would have thought that we see so much development speaking about phasing out of fossil fuels at a COP just after the announcements of the US to withdraw from the Paris Agreement here. We will see what dynamics we will see until the end of the COP. Global energy markets are undergoing a rapid transformation. Renewable energies explode in most parts of the world. Electrification grows fast, but so far fossil fuels globally are not shifting but still growing. That's the big challenge at the moment. We see there are many reasons to move down fossil fuels. There are cheaper and safer alternatives. There are many health effects connected with it, and the dependency from other countries can be drastically reduced, especially in a geopolitically unstable world. And we see lots of price fluctuations from fossil fuels now. So there are many good reasons to say, let's move to the cheaper option. And this is what we are speaking today about. I'm very happy to have this great plenary here together. Niklas Höhne from New Climate Institute will give us the key presentation in the beginning. And then we will have a discussion. And before the discussion, I will introduce the other speakers here. So Niklas, the floor is up for you.
I don't know whether you can hear me. Now you can. Great, excellent. Thank you. So at this COP, which Christoph already said is a kind of a surprise that this transitioning away from fossil fuels is higher on the agenda and more discussed than at least I expected. We at New Climate Institute, together with German Watch, we did a little bit of analysis of exactly the risks of fossil fuel imports and the dependencies and barriers of phasing out fossil fuels. And I'll show you a few slides here at the beginning to explain to you some of the arguments that are there to phase out fossil fuels entirely, because in general they create a lot of risks. So these are some arguments and evidence. If you're interested in those, we have some more slides. So if you're interested in the slides, we can send them to you as well. All right, first of all, if the clicker works, it doesn't. Maybe somebody helps me then to put on the next slide. I have trouble. There we are. Okay, now it works. Excellent. There we are. Great. So, first of all, who are the most or the largest fossil fuel importers and the largest fossil fuel exporters in terms of energy content? And it's an interesting list when you look at it. So the largest importers are countries like Korea, Japan, and Germany is already on number 3. Further down, US is half-half. It's an exporter of gas and an importer of oil. And on the right-hand side, you have the largest exporters, And well, Canada, Norway, Russia, that's what you probably expected, but also Brazil is quite high on that list of the fossil fuel exporters. In any way, these fossil fuels are powering our world right now. So it's the backbone of every modern economy. Yeah? Too many countries really rely on imported fossil fuels to keep lights on and to keep factories running. So it is absolutely fundamental still for many of our countries. But the costs are enormous. So the energy import dependency is huge for some countries. So this is a list of countries that import most of their energy. Yeah? So 24 countries import more than 70% of their energy. That's fascinating. Yeah? So they are totally dependent on importing energy. And these are small countries, but also Netherlands or Greece. Japan is very high on the list. More than 80% of the energy is imported. And that basically creates a critical dependence. And if that import doesn't work, the whole economy doesn't work. So it's a huge risk for these countries. So what is also important is that for each import of fossil fuels, billions leave the country, basically. Billions that are paid for oil and gas and that are not used for something else. They're not used to strengthen domestic industries, they're not used for jobs, they're not used for security, they're used basically somewhere else. And even the oil and gas prices have risen faster than inflation in the past, so that is a significant risk. If you look at countries, how much countries are spending on fossil fuels compared to their national GDP, and it's quite high. So we have again 24 countries that spend more than 2% of their GDP for fossil fuels. That's incredible. No, it's really high numbers. It's countries like India spend 4% of their GDP for fossil fuel imports. And that basically is repeated each year. Each year you spend that money that you can then not spend for something else. And the other problem is that the prices are volatile. They go up and down. And if you're really dependent on your fossil fuel imports, you really have to make sure that you can pay for it. And if the price is fluctuating, here on this figure you can see it for gas, you have significant problems. And the reasons for price fluctuations are different. You have economic shocks like the COVID pandemic, which created a huge price spike. You have geopolitical tensions, for example, the Russian invasion in the Ukraine, which is a very high price spike for the gas. But more and more you have climate events that also create price spikes. For example here, severe heat wave in Japan, which made it very difficult for Japan to capture it. So that is a huge risk, and it will get larger. With more climate change, you will have more price volatility. For oil, it's the same thing. For oil, you had severe weather events like Hurricane Katrina that basically destroyed quite some refinery infrastructure, and that then led to a significant price spike. So with more climate impacts, you will have more price spikes and more vulnerability. So the risks are rising. As I said, import dependence is a real strain on national finance and weakens economic dependency. And countries are really exposed to geopolitical pressures. You know, they can be blackmailed, which is actually happening at this moment. Real blackmailing on fossil fuel imports. And another one is, it's the countries that have fossil fuels, they often then also have fossil fuel subsidies. So not only are they purchasing fossil fuels from the outside, they're also making them cheaper for the consumers. And again, we found at least 15 countries that spend more than 2% of their GDP just on fossil fuel subsidies. And an interesting country there is as well, that's the one that I'm coming from Germany. But as you can see here on the list, many other countries are there that use fossil fuel subsidies, which basically then slows down the energy transition and prolongs the fossil fuel dependence. So that's all the bans, but we have a solution actually, and the choice is very, very clear. Get away with the fossil fuel import dependency and go for energy efficiency, renewables, spend the money at home, and that would be the obvious choice. But unfortunately, that obvious choice is not happening for some reason. And we looked at that as well. There are several barriers that prevent governments and countries to go that obvious route. And just to name a few here, we categorize them in 4 I's. So in interests, institutions, ideas, and international. And I will not go into all of the details, but you may know many of them. So starting with interests, there are vested interests from companies, the companies that are there already, that are, have a clear interest of not changing the current business model. And you also have revolving doors. So intertwining between the companies that have revolving interest and the ministries that are taking the decisions. So we found a case, for example, of a Italian energy utility. They even have a secondment program. They have a secondment program towards the government. So there's a constant exchange between the energy utility, which is based on fossils, and the government institutions, where people simply go back and forth. That's one way, but also institutions. And there, I think the main thing is that many governments and also governments are basically relying on this relationship with the fossil fuel industry. So some governments own the fossil fuel importing industry, or some governments own shares of the industry that is deploying LNG terminals and things like that. Then another one is ideas. The narrative, gas is a transition fuel, or we need fossil fuels for energy security. That in most cases is not true, but it's still a very high narrative that is made forward. And then lastly, international relationships, long-term contracts, alliances that have been built for many years that make it very difficult to come over it. So my last overview slide is what I've said already. There's many risks with fossil fuel imports. It's super expensive, it's risky, there's volatile prices or volatility, and then there is a clear opportunity to do better, which is getting away from it. But there are also numerous barriers to overcome to do this. And I look forward to this panel to find out how the people here on the stage see it, on what we can do to overcome these barriers. Thank you, Christoph.
Thank you very much, Niklas. Yes, thank you for this great overview. And I think it gives us a good basis to discuss a few points regarding the options you have put on the table. And I want to introduce, first of all, Louise Burrows. It's great to have you here, Louise. You are head of government affairs from the Global Renewables Alliance. One of the biggest dynamics we see at the moment is the building up from renewable energies. But how much progress do we make at the moment? The new latest World Economic Outlook was a bit skeptical regarding this, saying we are a bit slowing down in this regard because of the counter pressure we see from some countries. How do you judge the situation at the moment?
Is this working? Can you hear me? Great, yes. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to German Watch and the New Climate Institute for this really important conversation, particularly, as you were saying, at the moment with the debate on a need for a roadmap to phase out fossil fuels. So I'm Louise Burrows. I'm the head of advocacy and government affairs at the Global Renewables Alliance. So we represent the global renewables industry. So we were set up 3 years ago to be that unifying voice for the industry, to advocate for the goal to triple global renewables by 2030, and to make sure that we maintain political momentum behind that goal and support countries on that journey. Now, I have a confession to make. I actually used, before I took this job a year and a half ago, I was a campaigner on the phase out of fossil fuels. So I'm a real fossil fuel phase-out campaigner at heart. Don't tell my boss. I don't know where he is at the moment. So I really, really welcome this conversation. In terms of where we're at with renewables, so there's a kind of two sides to this story. I think as the UN Secretary General said in his opening speech last week, renewables are winning on price, they're winning on potential, and they are winning on performance. And that's absolutely true in terms of what we are seeing. We are seeing records in renewable deployment last year, with the new electricity deployment being 90% from renewables. All of the energy additions last year of those renewables, 90% of those were cheaper than new fossil fuels. And we're seeing real progress in this space on jobs as well. So, you know, every 3 jobs per fossil fuel jobs are in renewables. And we know that there'll be around 38 million jobs within renewables by 2030 as well. 97% of business are also backing the transition. They want to see a phase out of fossil fuels, and they are demanding renewables to be powering their industries. And we're seeing 409 billion saved in fossil fuel subsidies and in money from governments in the last decade as they have shifted to renewables. So the trajectory is one of a very good story, but the issue is that it's not universal. So in terms of finance, for example, we're seeing 85% of renewable finance only going into the US, the EU, and China, and only 15% of renewable finance going into emerging and developing economies. And looking at the global picture of the tripling goal, we are not on track. So there's various numbers on this, around 2.6, 2.7 times of where we are in terms, you know, of the current trajectories for 2030. But actually, when you take China out of that, we are really off track in terms of hitting that goal. So we really need to see more progress around what are the enabling policies and politics in order to get renewables. So that's action on grids, that's action on storage, that's action on permitting and regulation, all the boring technical pieces that everybody is starting to wake up to now to understand where we need to be. And the last point I will make in terms of why, you know, one of the core barriers that we are facing as the industry is disinformation. So we are losing the narrative, you know, in this space, even though this evidence could not be clearer as to why it is just crazy for countries to be so dependent on fossils when it costs them so much in terms of not just investment, but also health, air pollution, you know, all those external factors as well. So my understanding is that the fossil industry spends around 4% of their profits on lobbying and advocacy. And when you think they make trillions a year, that is a lot of money that we as the renewable industry do not have and cannot compete with. So a big part of our strategy next year is going to be focused on global communications, on comms and narrative, because we really should be winning the populist narrative actually in this fight as well. So just wanted to make that quick point. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. We got yesterday, was published the information that we have 1,900 fossil lobbyists here in the conference, accredited to the conference, to the COP here. So we see this influence very visible here. But coming back to you, many countries say, but even if we could get rid gas for the electricity, we still would need it for the industry. How would you react to this request or position?
Well, I think there's just such a juxtaposition in that question of saying, oh, we can phase out within the power sector, but let's just continue to rely on fossil fuels in industry. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. You know, gas dependence does not build energy security. So our answer to that is electrification. So we know that around 75% of today's electricity can be electrified with existing technology. So we're not just advocating on behalf of the supply around building renewable generation, but also trying to electrify industries and technologies in order to speed up the transition as well. And on clean industrialization, you know, this is actually already real. This is not theoretical in the fact that you can power industries off, you know, green electrons, but also green molecules, so green hydrogen. So at the moment, there's nearly 70 commercial clean industrial projects that are already operating worldwide, and there are another 65 plants under construction, and apparently 700 projects in the pipeline, which is a significant number, and also a third of those are in emerging economies. So this is starting to really gain traction, and actually countries like Brazil are leading the way on this and trying to create that new demand through industry for renewables, particularly wind, solar, and green hydrogen, as I just mentioned. And so we've been supporting a campaign here as well called Build Clean Now with the Industrial Transition Accelerator, a huge campaign to get industry and governments to wake up to this fact that this is possible. We should be building clean industry now with renewables and trying to build some knowledge sharing around this agenda and trying to create the confidence that for governments to, to do this, to build those contracts and understanding what those blueprints are for success as well. So it's totally possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this encouraging message and the clear numbers behind it, so that you made it fact-based and not just as a belief statement. Thank you for this. And with this, I want to come to you, Gareth. Gareth Phillips is manager for climate and environment in the finance division of the African Development Bank. Very welcome here. And what can you say about the situation in South Africa and Africa regarding the possibilities and the hurdles to move out of the fossil path into renewable energies and electrification?
Great. Well, thank you very much indeed for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon, and congratulations, Louise, on all those fantastic figures. Unlike Louise, I am not well researched and backed up, so everything for me is more kind of anecdotal. But these are very interesting topics. Of course, in Africa, we have huge potential for renewable energy production, and we have actually relatively few industrialized facilities, so only several countries really have an industrial sector, which means that we have that opportunity to leapfrog a fossil-fueled pathway if we could mobilize sufficient resources to provide the renewable energy in the first instance. So, I think there is a message of hope there. There is an opportunity. There is a lot of talk about using gas as a transition fuel, and that worries me a lot that even within our definition of Paris-aligned finance, if gas is part of your NDC or your long-term strategy, and you can show that, if you can write down on a piece of paper that you're going to use gas now and transition away from it in 20 or 30 years, then it can pass the test of being Paris-aligned. But I'm very concerned about that, because for sure, once you put in that gas pipeline to power a gas-powered energy station, somebody else is going to come along and say, oh, just let me tap into that because I can do a fertilizer plant and then I can do something else. And it's going to be very difficult to stop that kind of mission creep. So there is a challenge to make sure that if Africa does use gas, we really try to maintain it for energy only and make sure that doesn't extend further. But South Africa is a very interesting example. It wasn't listed in the graphs that I saw, but they have a massive energy dependence on their own produced coal in particular. So they weren't importing it, but nonetheless, it's a massive source of greenhouse gas emissions. It's also a massive source of inefficiencies. And there's been a lot of effort gone into the just energy transition in South Africa. And I think one of the really interesting points, and it's a lesson that I think can translate to other situations as well, is that in the end, because the whole energy sector in South Africa is incredibly politicized because of the role of Eskom, and in the end, what enabled the political settlement to be achieved was the deal on creating green jobs and creating new jobs for the miners coming out of the mines producing the coal, but also opportunities for entire communities that were living off the revenues coming from the coal mines. And there's one area in particular in Mpumalanga where there's a great concentration of coal mining, and we've been doing a lot of work there with the World Bank and support from various donors, including the climate investment funds, on training women, youth and miners to take on new jobs under a very strong Just Transition program. And I noticed, I think Just Transition was also a focus of this pavilion. And, it's interesting because, in the Paris Agreement, it talks about low carbon, climate resilient and just transition. And a few years ago, we were all quite surprised when people start saying, well, you must start thinking about the just transition. But actually, in that instance, that was key to enabling us to move forward and make that transition. Sorry. I also wanted to mention another point on the green industrialization. I'm a great fan. I grew up with emissions trading schemes, the UK and then the EU emissions trading scheme. And I've been following a little bit the progress of CBAM, and it's quite divisive. I'm sure some of you are aware. In Africa, CBAM is seen as a barrier to trade. And I've rarely found one of my African colleagues who has a good word to say about it. And yet, I see it as a huge incentive to finance the transition away from fossil fuel. It's a way to avoid paying those costs. And it's difficult to finance things on avoided costs, the same we find with energy efficiency. It's very difficult to fund those things on avoided costs. But nonetheless, at the price of a European allowance, it's the best money you can get for a green project. Don't go down the carbon market, ITMO's mitigation outcomes, go for CBAM. Because you're going to get 60 to 70 euros worth of benefit from every ton. But the other challenge we have in Africa with that is the complexity around the monitoring, reporting, verification, and we really need support and help there to cope with that complexity. Let me stop there and come back later.
Yes, thank you very much for this very concrete proposal. I think we have definitely to work on this kind of dialogue about the CBAM, how to make it work in a constructive way. But I want to mention another point. In 2 years from now, we will have a COP in Africa. What could be the role of the African Development Bank to support this leapfrogging process for African countries in the spirit of a just transition, that we really see the movement there. We have now seen in 22 African countries an exponential growth of renewable energy in the last year. But how can this be supported, and also in the context of just transition, that it works for energy access to electricity as well?
Thank you very much. So indeed, we are very much looking forward to welcoming you to Addis Ababa in 2 years' time. We had a dry run with the Africa Climate Week in September, Africa Climate Summit, 2 weeks of events. So they've got the staying power. I think they've got quite a few hotels, and the transport is quite good as well. So we look forward to welcoming you for that. So green industrialization is, we have, for example, the climate investment funds now running a industrial decarbonization program. It's one of their programs under the Strategic Climate Fund, the SCF. And Africa actually dominated the selected countries. You may not know, and I won't go into the details of how SIF works, but it selects countries on the basis of expressions of interest, and then they're invited to prepare an investment plan, and there's an envelope of concessional finance that comes to support the development of that investment plan. So if I recall correctly, 7 out of 9 countries selected for industrial decarbonization came from Africa. And in the end, 5 of them have been invited to move forward with the preparation of industrial decarbonization investment plans. In Namibia, it's a big focus on green hydrogen and renewable energy. In Egypt, I think there'll be a big focus on using their excess solar generation that they have. Now I'm struggling to remember the other countries. But anyway, there's a lot of momentum behind industrial decarbonization and huge potential because, we have so much renewable energy potential. We have the minerals. We have huge labor forces. Well, I know 33% of the population is less than 18 years old. I mean, it's incredible, the energy, the population statistics there, the potential for young people coming in, entrepreneurship, labor and demand, and so on. So many things are in place to support a green industrialization pathway in Africa. And, I really hope that the African Development Bank will be working very closely with our countries, our member countries, to help take advantage of that.
Great. Thank you very much. So we can hope that we see a further increase of the positive development, especially for Africa, and that the solar paradox on there, that it's from physical reasons by far the best continent for solar energy, but we have least investments there, that this will change in the next time. And with this, I want to come to you, Ziaul. Ziaul Haque, it's great that you are also with us. You are Additional Director General of the Department of Environment from the government of Bangladesh. And also Bangladesh is one of those countries heavily dependent on import of fossil fuels. Maybe you can explain us a little bit the situation of your country. What are the challenges and how do you try to overcome them?
Thank you, Christoph, and good afternoon, colleagues. It is my great honor to be here with you. And Nicholas, you made a very good presentation, enlightening presentation for us. In fact, we understood that one day we have to transition away from the fossil fuel in a just and orderly manner. But the point is when and how fast. And in terms of Bangladesh situation, as you mentioned, that we import both the natural gas and the liquid fuel. And in terms of natural gas, we produce almost 70% of the natural gas domestically. But in terms of the liquid fuel, it is almost 90%. We import from the importers, from the exporters, and it is almost 8 million tons per year annually. So obviously, we understand that there is a dependency on oil imports from outside, and obviously we face some difficulty when the price fluctuation and the volatility occurs. And particularly, we face serious difficulty when the Russian and Ukraine war began. At the time, we import the refined oil, mostly refined oil, with very low sulfur content in terms of diesel, and in terms of the gasoline, a good quality gasoline. But later, starting from 2021, 2022, we started importing low quality diesel and gasoline. And it has also created huge air pollution. So in one hand, we are producing carbon emission. On the other, we are deteriorating our air quality for cities and country as a whole. So, but the point is, since we are not fully dependent on gas import, in terms of gas, we have assessment that in terms of the electricity generation, almost 40% comes from the gas-based power plant, and 20% from the HFO, and around 23% from the coal, and renewable energy actually contribution is around 5%. So we understand that this is a situation when gas actually supply will be less, and we are not exploring. We haven't actually got new gas field over the last many years. Over the last 10 years, we are still exploring the gas field, and if we get, it is very fortunate enough. If we don't get, then it will continue to import the liquid fuel in the coming years, in the days to come, in the years to come. And that's why it is important to expand the renewable energy sources. And in the NDC, I would say that we submitted our NDC 3 in last 29th September. In the NDC, we have made a very specific target that by 2035, we'll increase our renewable share from 5% to 25% by 2035. And in terms of our renewable energy policy, it would be 30% by 2040. So we are pursuing towards achieving those targets, both the NDC target and renewable energy policy target. But again, it is true that we have been facing some difficulty in terms of fluctuations, the volatility, and at the same time, we depend on both the spot market and the agreement, the sale and purchase agreement So we are using both this approach, but in terms of spot market, we face different situation, since the fluctuation is more than the agreement that we have made.
So if I understand correctly, where you have to import so much oil, so you have a high willingness trying to speed up to be less dependent on oil imports. This means also electrification probably is an important part of the strategy for you. And for gas, you see it a bit more relaxed, as much as from your own country, but nevertheless, for building up renewable energies for the electricity system, makes a lot of sense for you as well in this context. No? Could you foresee what are the reasons to think about speeding up this process for renewable energies and electrification? What are the hurdles that you don't do it, and what could help you to move in this direction?
Yeah, in fact, in terms of the energy consumption, we see that almost 75% are consumed for electricity generation, captive power, the usual power plants, and industry. So in that case, obviously, we have to look at the electricity generation at the first place, and we have started how to utilize our potential. We have solar potential, we have wind potential. We haven't utilized our wind potential as of now. We are trying to actually foster the potential as soon as possible. In terms of solar, since Bangladesh is a small country, we are actually facing some land scarcity. So we are trying to get the improved technology at scale and the storage facility, so that we can have more electricity from solar sources with minimal land. And we are also trying to utilize our wetlands. We have huge wetlands across the country. So whether the wetlands can be utilized for solar electrification. And now we have we already made some options, mitigation options already put in place in the NDC 3, and there are some other options we made in our renewable energy policy. So it is the high time for Bangladesh to implement the policy, implement the NDC, and again, it requires some resources, domestic and international resources, and we have started actually developing the investment plan for implementation of the NDC 3, and hopefully through our investment plan, we will be able to attract some domestic fund and the international fund to expand our renewable energy potential for power generation.
Thank you, Ziaul. I'm very glad that you focused on the combination of the national framework setting with the international support and framework setting as well, because I think we need both in a good combination and not just the one or the other. Thank you for this. And with this, I want to come to our last speaker here on the panel. It's Julia Schweiger. Julia Schweiger is policy advisor in the Ministry of Environment and Climate here in Germany, and she is one of the big strategic thinkers in this ministry. I just want to tell you, she's really one of the persons driving the big thinking process in this ministry forward. So thank you for this, Julia. With this, I want to come then to your question. What we are seeing here is that your Secretary of State, Jochen Flassbart, at a side event committed for Germany to saying if there is a negotiated outcome for TAF, so for the transitioning away of fossil fuels, that's one of the new acronyms everybody should learn in this COP now, TAF. If we get an agreement there, that Germany will support this. And what do you see at the moment here? Where are the dynamics in this direction? And where do you see the drivers behind it, that so many countries speak about it. Many journalists are really totally surprised, saying we had expected that all those countries are threatened by the US not to speak about fossil fuels here, and suddenly this is such a big issue. How do you explain this? What are the drivers behind it?
Thank you, Christoph. Hello, everyone. That's a tricky one, but I think, yes, it's dynamic, and I think it's driven by the interest to reach clarity, more clarity on what the roadmap is, what the pathways are, what the future looks like, how the transition goes forward, and how quickly and at what scale and at what speed. And I think looking back, COP28 really delivered us a historic outcome with paragraph 28 at the GST, giving us the tripling target, the doubling target, and the transition away from fossil fuels. And when we look there, so Louise already told us what the numbers are on renewables, and we know that with efficiency we have to do way more. And from the German government, we thought about this, the GST outcome, and said, okay, we need to look at the enablers. And that's why, for example, on the renewable side, we are really happy that this year we can talk about grids. And we say we need to look at the skills and the jobs impacts. But it goes on. And for transitioning away, we've not had that type of conversation in the past 2 years. And I think it's high time that there is a much more concrete look at it. And I think that's behind the dynamic. So transitioning away is already happening. Sometimes we openly call it, we put milestones, for example, for coal phase out, but sometimes it's not really talked about or not called like that. So electrification, for example, is happening. Electromobility or in the heating system, efficiency in housing and other ways. There's a lot of policies happening, a lot of action happening, but we don't call it transitioning away, and that has its reasons. But I think making that more clear is the way to go, because I think many of us, but also many stakeholders involved in the energy system are seeking that clarity. That's why there's a new talk around energy planning. There's a researched interest in energy planning. It gives market signals. It's about demand signals. It's about supply signals and the stability of markets. People want to have that clarity on where the transition is going. And I think everyone wants to understand the impacts. We have learned a lot about potential impacts of climate change, and there is a lot of calculations about the impacts of the transition. But to really go into depth there and get the foresight, who is impacted, where, what kind of aspects are decisive, and that's where your analysis comes in, and it's really helpful to really help structure that type of thinking. It's like, what are the aspects that we need to think about? And all that concrete information helps us to go forward and to drive that transition forward, and to really see how who's affected, what kind of roadmap is needed in terms of identifying new roles, new stakeholders, and then translating that back to also governments or countries who want to know what kind of impacts they have to foresee with price dependencies or energy security, and reducing dependencies and strengthening resiliency is really what drives that interest.
Thank you. Yes, I sometimes think if you look to the reform of the NDCs, what the countries have presented here, if each of them would have included saying what are the positive opportunities if we move to a situation phasing out fossil fuels and to a new energy and also for all the other sectors a transformative system. What are the job opportunities? What are the investment opportunities? And then what are the hurdles to overcome this where we need support? That this would be focus the debate so much more on the positive side of it. At the moment, it's so much focused on the risks. What do we lose if we move away from the fossil side? Would this help?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I really think that exactly that, to really So both. Let me put it like that. So only talking about the positive impacts without putting that in relation is not going to convince. I think people do not understand big numbers. I'm a person who does not understand big numbers. So as soon as you tell me a number, I get lost. But once you tell me this is 2% of your GDP, or with this you can invest into your schools or in your education, or with this the air is going to be cleaner and hence you avoid other risks, or you say this is a green industrialization strategy for this region that is impacted or is underdeveloped, or you say I'm going to build a grid, and with that energy that is coming you can do develop the ideas that are in the people or the economies that you want to. I think that is driving it. But on the other side, you do have to make transparent the hidden costs. And I think that's what Louise referred to earlier, that there is that more clarity would be helpful. And
there's the just transition part of it. We discussed also regarding South Africa and others, that we have to be clear about the costs as well and how to support the regions and the affected people.
Yeah.
No? Yes.
And then maybe also policy planning needs time.
Yeah.
You need to, identify the topic, you identify the ideas you have, and you start the process, and then it takes a while, and you have to take the people on board with you and to really identify how to do that. So you need that space to have that dialogue, you have the space to improve your policy as well, to implement it, but you need to be very clear in the direction, and I think that's where more transparency in the transitioning away in tough comes in, and that's not only the local or the regional or the governmental space, it's also for the global space, and I think for the global conversation we are here.
Thank you, Julia. And with this, Niklas, what have you heard, and does this encourage you to move on with this project, and what have you taken on board for the next step?
Yeah, thank you. Definitely a great discussion, and thanks for all of these inputs. And I think we have to think about it comprehensively. That is very important. But I don't know. Coming back to the import dependency, it's from the arguments. It's so super obvious. Yeah. And this one obvious example, I was wondering why it didn't come, but in Africa, Ethiopia, for example, banned the import of fossil fuel cars because it simply doesn't make sense to import cars and to import fossil fuels, while you have, in Ethiopia, there's electricity en masse because you have hydropower, and then just importing electric cars, and then you can just forget about importing fossil fuels. It's much cheaper, it's much better, it's simply the way to go. And that is an obvious example, but I think in other cases it's also obvious, but it's simply not happening. And for me, the one thing that I'm most worried about, and you said it, Louise, it's the lobbying power of those that benefit from the current system. And that is something that I don't really know how to overcome. But that's, for me, the biggest challenge right now. Always, when there is something irrational happening, then something must be wrong in the system. And I think that's where we are right now, and that's where we have to work on. And I hope that a roadmap, if really a roadmap comes out of here, really shows of what has to happen when to phase out certain things in which areas, that would help countries and governments as well to basically say, hey, this is what we agreed, this is where it's going. And even if somebody else says, no, we will have gas forever and it's a bridge fuel and it's good for you, then they have something to counter that. So that's why I think a decision here on a roadmap in a certain direction can help also with that problem.
Thank you very much. I think it will only be if we get it, it will only be on a process for a roadmap, not yet the roadmap here, but nevertheless it would help enormously to move forward. Are there any questions in the room? We have still a few minutes if there is the one or the other question. Here is one. Please introduce yourself first.
Hi, I'm Marie Kermer. I'm a freelance journalist covering for the Frankfurter Allgemeine in Germany. And I was wondering about the lobbying power you just mentioned. Do you feel it at this COP? And in which sense, maybe?
Christoph was saying it is already that we have, 1,900 lobbyists here. I'm not in the negotiation room, so I can't say whether it really has an impact there. but maybe others who are closer who have a good answer to that one.
Can you hear me? Great. So I'm Louise, and I work for the global renewables industry. So we are the counterweight and the counter lobby to the fossil fuel lobby. Personally, with the conversations that I've been having with governments, particularly across Europe and the progressives and the allies, I think it's not being felt as strongly as we had anticipated. The sense that I'm getting from the conversations that are happening on the floor is that there's a sense of surprise at how smooth some of the debates and the conversations are on the agreement of the need to have a roadmap or a dialogue. Where the problem is actually where it will land and if it will land anywhere. And it's building the confidence of countries to kind of raise this issue more openly on the floor, to put this forward so that the Brazilian president feel that they can take this forward. So that being said, the ministers will come in next week, negotiations heat up, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of our laggard or unfriendlier countries kind of move in that space. But that's why we are here, to be that really strong and loud counterweight. You know, we have a pavilion, we have a series of events, but we've been launching a big campaign called Jobs, Security, Growth to really demonstrate the benefits, as Julia was saying, of the transition. And it's not just us as GRA. We've got a lot of our companies here from across the renewables supply chain, from buyers to suppliers, to really be telling that story and trying to win back the narrative that we have been doing. And I just want to say that I really agree with what Julia was saying, in that we do need to have a much more people-centered approach to this narrative. You know, I love to give off all these big numbers all the time, but having individuals tell the story of progress is really critical. And the one thing I would say, we had quite a powerful campaign in the UK recently against the Reform Party, who are the far-right party, who are gaining traction at the moment because they are really anti-net zero. And there were workers who work in an electric vehicle factory from Liverpool in the north, did this big campaign saying, Nigel Farage, why do you want to take away my jobs? And it was like having them say it directly was awesome to see. So we're hoping to kind of build a lot more of that over the next year. Thanks.
Yes. Maybe I could add a few more examples to be quite concrete in this regard. If you read what the CEO of Total is just saying to this tough process, he's openly attacking this and saying this will not happen. And he has quite a number of people here in the process. So this is, from me, it's incredible that a European company is acting like this. Or if you see the new International Energy, the new IEA report, what we have seen, and the scenarios there. One scenario came back only by the lobbying of the US and the fossil sector. And this, at the moment, creates so much uncertainty because it's not based on facts but on lobbying, that this came back as a scenario there. And this is such a poison for this process here. And so I could give you many examples in this regard. And I think this really, you can see it again and again. Or you could see here the Article 6.4 negotiations, where we had agreed on relatively strict rules for the Article 6.4, and then suddenly, in a very intransparent way, the discussion was reopened here during the conference again to change those rules of the game. And this could destroy the entire emission trading system in the EU if this would happen in a very bad way, as it has happened with the Kyoto Protocol before. So some concrete examples for this happening here. It's very obvious if you look into the details. Yes.
I can just give you an example in the negotiation room. What is happening in the negotiation room? We can actually feel their presence in the negotiation room. some of the state delegates or group of countries, when they speak and when they, how they use their languages in terms of ignoring the previous decisions. We understand that, for instance, in terms of referring to 1.5 degree, keeping 1.5 degree within reach or alive, it is very much language in the Glasgow decisions and the following COP decisions. Now they are trying to disown this language that has been adopted collectively by all countries. This is agreed by all countries. Now they are trying to actually disown, and they say that now 1.5 degree has no relevance. It is almost crossing the 1.5, so we should not mention 1.5 at this stage. And even referring to best available science. We could not do that in mitigation work program, in RSO. There is no referencing to best available science, 1.5 degree within reach. This language has been adopted by all countries, by COP, Glasgow COP, then Sharm el-Sheikh COP, and previous COPs. So we see their visibility, their presence very much in the room.
Yes. So thank you very much. It was, there could be so many examples. I personally had the pleasure to follow all 30 COPs. And there was a big change in the transparency of the lobbying when the mobile phone came into the game. Before, it was always in the lobby that those fossil lawyers were sitting and handing over to the different parties what they have to say and so. This is now all doing with the mobile happening with the mobile phone. But this was such a, in the first 10 years, 12 years of the process, this was, I could give you more than 100 photos of it. And this was so visible. And now we see there are far more lobbyists here than there were at this time. It's really not a story made up. Julia.
I would like to add on that, because I leave it to the negotiators just to be worried about the lobbyists here at COP. I worry about the abundance of people that are not at the COP who also believe that fossil fuels is the only way to go, and it has been powering our energy systems for the past decades and should continue to do so. So I'm not so worried about the few that are here. I'm worried about the ones that are in every country, and so I think that's the challenge. I think that's where we need to go out with positive examples, with the positive stories, to talk about, how do we change the education systems or the examples in the economies? What is the vision for the green industrialization? What is the opportunities for the new industries? Where do jobs go? And so on and so forth. So I think that's where I would go.
Thank you. Then we have to come to the end. Let me just say, for summarizing, we have a fantastic dynamic in the world for renewable energies, electrification, and many other progress. It's not fast enough, but it's there. And the counter movement can slow it down, but they cannot win the game. That is not any longer possible. But they can prolong it in a way that it is very dangerous for climate reasons. And in this situation, as Niklas has shown, there are so many good reasons to speed up with this process. Not to get slower, but to go faster. But we also need the necessary support system for the different hurdles and challenges in this process for making this happening. We discussed it as just transition, or in many different ways. And this is what it is about, to think it's the cheaper way, it's the better way, it's the healthier way, it's the less risky way. And let's set a framework around it to be faster in this. And for those countries who have hurdles and difficulties and have to move out of other systems and so on, they need a just transition component, how to support them. That is what we have to organize, and I hope that we get this process going Thank you very much for all of you for coming here, and I hope you feel a bit encouraged to fight in the second week for a good outcome in this regard. Thank you.
Global Ziaul, realizing just transitions. Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP30 in Pavilion.